Welcome to the 7 core management behaviors, when and how to use them. This is Module 3, Train. This series is brought to you by John Dario and the Retail Management Formula, LLC. In the last module, we used the management situation grid to determine that delegate is the behavior to use when an employee's capability is high and before the employee performs a task. In this module, we will focus on the management behavior train. The objective of training is to teach an employee how to perform a task or skill. And our management situation grid shows us that this is the appropriate management behavior when an employee's capability is low and you are acting before the employee performs a task. It sounds logical, but let's confirm that it makes sense. The first part of the situation is that the employee's capability is low. Does it make sense for us to want to teach the task or skill when capability is low? Of course it does, so that checks out. Next, does it make sense for us to teach the task or skill before the employee performs it? Of course, we don't want to delegate a task to somebody who's incapable of doing it and then teach them after they've attempted and failed, so this checks out too. Note that you'll run across managers who have the attitude that they can delegate tasks to employees and let them figure out how to do the tasks on their own. This sink or swim method is, unfortunately, too common a practice. Even if the employee does figure it out on their own, it can't be considered training or teaching since the manager did neither of those things. It's actually delegation in the wrong situation and it can easily result in a poorly executed task and/or a frustrated employee. With the management situation grid, we won't make the same mistake. We'll always know that when the employee's capability is low, we must train, not delegate. So, that introduces the question of exactly how we determine that an employee's capability is low. This is the opposite of our discussion in the last module, so we can logically assume the answer is opposite of what we found in the last module, and that's true. We know an employee's capability is low when we know that the person has never yet successfully performed the task. But there's also another condition that would make an employee's capability low. That would be when the employee has successfully performed the task in the past, but the conditions have materially changed or are materially different. For example, the employee may have successfully performed the task while the branch or the store was very slow, like the situation on the left, but the situation may be very different when the branch or store is extremely busy with customers, like the photo on the right. Or the tasks such as processing a shipment may have been performed successfully during a very small shipment of only 4 boxes. And now the conditions are very different for a shipment with dozens of boxes. The employee may have successfully sold a product in a face-to-face live store environment and now must sell in an entirely different call center environment. In all of these cases, you can't assume that just because the employee was successful under one set of conditions, they'll also be capable in different conditions. Whereas with the management behavior of delegate in the last module, our focus was on communicating the what and the when. With train, our focus is on communicating the how. It's not fair to tell an employee what to do and when to do it if you fail to first tell them how to do it. We'll teach them through a process of 5 steps. The first step is to explain to the employee exactly what the expectations are. The expectations include both the desired result they are expected to achieve and the steps they must take to achieve the result. Let's take the simple example of teaching a new employee how to take a package to the post office to be delivered to a customer. If the employee's never done this before, you must explain the desired result and the steps necessary. For example, you tell the employee that the objective is to get the customer's package to the post office so that the postal service can deliver it tomorrow. You'll explain that the steps are, number 1, place the customer's ordered item in the box and seal the box. Number 2, put the customer's address label on the package. Number 3, walk 2 blocks east. Number 4, turn left and walk 1 block north. Number 5, turn right and walk 1 block east. Number 6, the post office will be on your left in about 1 block. And number 7, go to the main counter and hand them the labeled box. This seems like an awful lot of silly detail, but this step-by-step instruction is how the employee will know exactly how to complete the task. There are a couple of ways that expectations can be explained. Communication can be either verbal or written, and communication can be done one-on-one or with a group, assuming that more than one person is being trained at a time. That leaves 4 possible combinations: one-on-one verbally, one-on-one written, in a group verbally, and in a group written. Which do you think is the most effective? Yeah, it's a trick question. All 4 methods of communication should be used. Different people absorb information in different ways. Depending on the complexity of the training involved, the more ways you communicate, the better your chances of getting the message across successfully. Step 2 is to ensure understanding and commitment. These are 2 very different things. Just because somebody understands doesn't necessarily mean they're committed. Starting with understanding, the best way to confirm is to ask the employee to repeat back to you in their own words what they understand the steps to be. We talked about this in the last module as well, and it should go without saying that if they get it wrong, you must go back to step 1 and explain things all over again. You also want to watch for red flags that indicate lack of commitment to the task or project being trained. As in the case of delegating, an employee may not believe in whatever the person's being trained. Perhaps they have received conflicting training in the past, or maybe they don't understand what they are being told. Hesitant body language, unsure tone of voice, lack of eye contact, and lots of questions are all signs that an employee is not fully bought into the message. When you see these red flags, you must stop and find out what part of your training is not being effective. The best way to do this is to make it safe for the employee to be honest with their feelings and to ask questions. Remember that they're in a learning mode, and it's in both of your best interests for 2-way communication to be safe. And it should be clear to the employee that their learning of the task will be safe. How many people would jump into a kayak on a river for the first time if they didn't have the safety of a life jacket in case the kayak tipped over? Performing a task at work may not be as risky as flipping a kayak in a river, but you still want employees to feel confident that they won't be punished if they fail the first time they attempt a new task. Step 3 of the training process is practice, practice, practice. I use the word 3 times because I feel it's that important to the training and learning process. In my home state of New Jersey, the process of obtaining a driver's license involves multiple steps of mandated practice. A 16-year-old learner must complete at least 6 hours of practice with a professional driving instructor, and then must practice with a licensed adult for a full year before having a chance to test for a restricted license. Once the restricted license is received, they must practice for another year under a probationary period before they can earn a full driver's license. The consequences can be severe for a teen behind the wheel who's not fully competent, and the state has set the rules in a way that ensures a lot of practice time before the learning driver can even have the opportunity to be tested for a license that validates their capability to drive. Learning a task or a skill in a retail environment doesn't carry near the amount of risk as learning to drive, but it's a good idea to build in as much practice time as is appropriate for the complexity and risk level of every task. Once the employee's demonstrated the ability to perform the task in a practice environment, it's now time to move on to the next step in the training process. Step 4 is to apply the practice to a real-life environment. Performing a task in a practice situation is one thing, but performing in real life's another. For example, it's a lot less pressure to drive in an empty parking lot or on a closed course than it is to drive on a real road with real traffic. The same applies in a retail setting. It's easier to sell to a pretend customer during a role play than it is to sell to a real customer who has real questions and real reactions to the answers. Once the employee demonstrates the ability to perform the task in real-life situations, they can truly be considered trained. The final step of the training process, step 5, is actually a step that occurs throughout the process, not just at the end. Step 5 is to track progress. I have put it at the end because the most important function of this step is to clearly denote the point at which an employee is officially considered trained. This is also the point at which the employee's capability switches from low to high. The key to step 5 is to carefully track 3 milestones in the training process. The first milestone is when an employee has been given expectations and you've confirmed that the employee understands the expectations. Within the context of the 5-step training process that we've been discussing, this occurs when steps 1 and 2 have been completed. You can mark achievement of the milestones in any number of ways and in any number of places. For this discussion, assume you're tracking on a sheet that has all employee names across the top and all of the various training initiatives along the left side, as you see in the table right here. Tracking can also be done on individual training logs, personal training passports, electronic files, and so on. Whatever the format, the important thing is that you track the progress of your employees through the training topics or initiatives that are important to your business. In this case, we see a single slash that indicates Lewis has been given the expectations and it's confirmed that he understands the expectations. In other words, steps 1 and 2 have been completed with Lewis. Now we see a second slash has been added to make an X. This indicates that Lewis has successfully demonstrated the skill in a practice environment. In other words, Lewis has completed step 3 of the 5-step training process for this initiative number 1. And now we've added a circle around the X. This indicates that Lewis has successfully demonstrated the skill in a real-world environment. And we know what that means. It means that Lewis has completed step 4 of the training process and he can officially be considered trained. Since Lewis is officially trained, we know his capability for initiative number 1 is high, and we can now delegate tasks that are related to initiative number 1 to him. I know this may look like a lot of needless work to track in this kind of detail, so why is it important to record progress in this way? What if your reality looks like this? If you don't have some sort of chart or tracking like this, how will you remember who's trained on which initiatives? And how will all of the managers on your team know each employee's status? And what if a new manager joins the team and doesn't know the staff members and their capabilities? And what if the size of the team is 50 people instead of 5? Tracking milestones of the training process on a per employee, per initiative basis is an important way to ensure everybody is clear at all times about whether an employee's capability is high or low on all important skills. And why is this important? If you answered that it's important because that information will determine which management behavior you'll use in various situations, you get a gold star for absorbing one of the key messages of this entire course. But what if you've been patiently training and the employee just isn't getting it? No matter how much you practice, they just can't seem to get it right. Or they can perform the skill in practice, but they just can't seem to apply the skill in the real-world environment. Remember, our main concepts from the beginning of Module 1. Most employees want to do a good job, and if an employee is failing to meet expectations, it's your fault as the manager, not theirs. If you accept these consequences, you'll take 3 actions. First, you'll go back to step 1 and re-explain the expectations and the how. Second, you'll try different teaching methods. And third, you'll try a different teacher. You owe it to the employee to give every effort to make the training process successful. After all of that, if the employee still isn't getting it, you can conclude that the employee should be trained. If you haven't seen them perform the skills successfully in a real-world environment, you can't say they are trained, but you can say that you've done all that you are physically able to do and that they should be trained at this point. The best you can do now is to treat the employee as if their capability is high, because it should be based on the training, and use the appropriate management behavior. That will most likely be the behavior correct. We'll come back to that in a later module. In summary, the training process involves 5 steps. 1. Explain the expectations with a special emphasis on the how. 2. Ensure understanding and commitment. 3. Practice, practice, practice. 4. Apply to a real-life environment. 5. Track progress. By following these steps, you'll successfully get employee capabilities to be high, and that will open the door to being able to delegate tasks to them. That brings us to the end of Module 3, Train. Next up will be Module 4, Follow-up. Thank you, and I'll talk to you next time.